Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. Welcome to today's webinar, Innovation and Leadership. I'm here with Shauna Sylvester, Brock Carlton, and Bill Young, and I'll introduce them in just a minute. My name is Paul Bourne. I'm the co-CEO of the Tamarack Institute, and it's my pleasure to host and introduce this first webinar in our Board of Directors webinar series. But before we start, I want to take a moment and reflect on the land that we're each gathering on. We begin the discussion by acknowledging that we are meeting on Indigenous land. As settlers, we are grateful for this opportunity to meet, and we thank all the generations of Indigenous peoples who have taken care of the land. As settlers, this recognition of the contributions and historic importance of Indigenous peoples must be clearly and overtly connected to our collective commitment to make the promise and the challenge of truth and reconciliation real in our communities. It's a commitment of Tamarack, and we encourage this for all Canadians. Thanks again for joining us. I want to introduce to you three people who are incredibly important to us at Tamarack, but they are important Canadians. They are people who have made tremendous contributions to our well-being and commitment. And I just want to say that as a leader in the Tamarack Institute, we are humbled that they have served with us and that they take our organization to another level. Shauna Sylvester is our board chair and a professor of professional practice and the executive director of Simon Fraser University's Center for Dialogue. She is an award-winning entrepreneur, facilitator, and commentator. She was the co-founder and executive director of 5 initiatives: the Simon Fraser University Public Square, Renewal Cities, Carbon Talks, Canada's World, and Impacts, the Institute for Media, Policy, and Civil Society. She's committed to excellence in public engagement and hosting difficult conversations. Welcome, Shauna.
Thanks so much, Paul. It's great to be here.
Lovely. Brock Carlton is vice chair of the board of directors, and he joined the Federation of Canadian Municipalities more than 25 years ago. Since then, he established himself as a leading voice on municipal issues, both domestically and internationally. As senior advisor to the CEO of FCM, Brock leads a strong team of staff and a united membership in advancing municipal interests by influencing both federal government decisions and national debates on issues that are critical to communities. Brock has since retired from Federation of Canadian Municipalities and is leading a lot of thought initiatives within the organization and beyond. So Brock, again, huge thanks for being on our board, and thanks for joining us today.
Oh, thanks for the invitation. This is fun.
Bill Young is our treasurer, the founder of Social Capital Partners, an innovative nonprofit social finance company started in 2001. Throughout its history, Social Capital Partners has facilitated thousands of jobs for people who face employment barriers through social enterprise and private sector by linking community hiring to attractive financing. That's a very small part, actually, of what Bill does. He's got a wide breadth of experience and commitment to Canadians, and is also a member of the Order of Canada. So Bill, thanks so much for joining us here today as well.
Great to be here. Have I got to put on the video?
Nope, you're good. We can see you. You look beautiful. So
I didn't do so well on that technology sort of tutorial I got.
There you go. So, today we have a lot to talk about. We want to talk about social innovation. We want to talk about cities. We want to talk about change. But also we want to hear from you. So know that, in the Q&A or chat function of Zoom. You can put your questions, and I'll work through them as we go today. So follow along and ask your questions, and we'll try to answer them. But I'm going to start by giving each one of you a question to get the conversation going. Like, first of all, Shauna, the Simon Fraser University Wosk Center for Dialogue focuses on engaging citizens in dialogue about key issues impacting Canada and democracy. What are some of the lessons emerging from these dialogue sessions?
Thanks, Paul. And I want to begin by acknowledging my land acknowledgement. I'm in British Columbia. I'm in the traditional territory of Tamarack, Syilx and Sinixt people. And I hope I got that right. I'm based here in Nelson, British Columbia today. And it's so great to be talking to the Tamarack community. So the lessons that we're learning, and there are many, I think. The first I would say is that COVID is having an impact on people's lives in a pretty profound way. We're talking about mental health in ways we've not talked about before. We're seeing the emergence of new types of organizing. So when the lockdowns occurred across the country and we saw many of our libraries, our social infrastructure closed down, that was the basis of our resilience as communities. And in the absence of that, new forms emerged. We started to see people organize in very different ways. One of the other things that we're seeing is young people profoundly impacted by COVID at a time when many young people are at a stage when they want to express themselves and have control over their lives. They're not getting that. So they're finding their voice in different ways. And for some, that's a very angry voice. Real anger is coming out. We're seeing that. But for the vast majority of young people that we're seeing them step in leadership roles. They have skills in this online world that many people my age and older don't have. And so they're stepping in very innovative ways. So that's another thing that we're seeing. I think the other really important piece is that this is a period of profound transformation in Canada. We're going through that. Today is a day after the US election, the first day of the election. We don't know the results, and there's a lot of anxiety. But what people are feeling is a sense of transformation, that racial equity and justice, that climate change, that moving with an ethic of care matters. It matters profoundly, and people are not interested to bounce back to whatever was prior to COVID. They really want to move in a different direction, a more equitable, a more just direction, a more green transition for those that really care passionately about climate change as well, really wanting to see that. We're seeing that come out in our dialogues, and we're seeing new forms of organization and new innovation. And that's exciting. And sort of where we're moving at the center is really following that.
Shauna, what's really impressed me in during COVID, and I've known you for a lot of years, so longer than that, but particularly because we're in these really challenging times, and you've been holding so many important dialogues in Canada for decades, right? But you seem hopeful. You seem like, I know you're a visionary, so I'm always looking at your vision, but tell me this hopefulness. How is that arising out of these dialogues? Like you often will share with me, oh, I heard this, I heard that, or I'm thinking about this, and just connect that for us.
Sure. I want to go back to March 16th. I think that's a really important day for us. That was the day that everything stopped. At Simon Fraser University, we were told we were going into a bit of a lockdown. That was a day for most people where I think anxiety levels went up. For me, it wasn't. My training was in conflict and post-conflict zones, so the issues of ambiguity are very comfortable for me. It was a time when I realized that the center could step in a profound way. So the first thing we did is I sat down with all the staff. It was on Zoom. We had learned how to use Zoom, like the Tamarack staff had. We'd learned how to use that already. We said, listen, What you were doing yesterday is not what you're going to be doing tomorrow. We need to create a goal for ourselves. And our goal was that whatever we do in this time has to lead to more resilience, more democracy, and greater racial equity and justice. That was our overall goal. Then we set up some minimum specifications. We are a center for dialogue. We believe in the power of dialogue. So it had to be dialogue focused. And we also embrace equity, diversity, and inclusion. So it had to embrace that. Then I basically said to everybody, you go and do what you need to do. Step into this situation, step in fully. And if you have to step back, that's okay. You need to know when to ebb and flow. You can step back too. But for those of you who have the comfort to step in, innovate. We are going to make mistakes. We're going to learn from those mistakes. And I want to tell you a couple of things that they did. In week 1, a number of the young people came to us and said, we don't know where to get information. We don't know if we should be going to school. We don't know what to do. So we created this website in 24 hours called We Got You, WEGOTCHU.ca. We Got You. And it answered all of these questions that young people had. We did it again on another issue within 24 hours, created another website because people didn't know how to move in the city. Like, do we take transit? Do we walk? Can we bike? Like, what can we do here? Can we do car sharing? So we created Moving in a Livable Region, created COVID-19, the website, to help people learn how to move. And those were just 2 things that we were doing to try and innovate in this space.
Nice.
And we've never been busier. The staff have never been so engaged in the work as we are right now. And we are always trying to move from a place of care and a place of resilience. So we know, I got a note today that said, staff, there's a number of staff that just need to ebb a little bit today. They need some time to do some self-care, and then they'll be ready to flow again. And that's about creating a muscle of resilience intelligence. And that's really what's guiding us.
Marvelous. A real testament to your leadership and to your team. Thanks, Shauna. Brock, interesting. I know that everyone in the municipal world knows you. And the work that you've done in leading and growing the work of, I think, nearly 4,000 municipalities in Canada has been nothing short but miraculous. And we are clearly a better Canada because of that. And I would suggest that we have some of the best communities, cities in the world. And you led much of that journey, and you spent most of your life at the Federation of Canadian Municipalities. I'd love to just kind of what are some of the key issues and challenges that are facing municipalities emerging from COVID? That's kind of my first question. And let's start there. I have a second question that I want to go to. Let's just start with that, because I think all of us kind of know what's happening in our backyards, but what are kind of some of the macro issues that are facing our municipalities, and what's the challenge that we have to overcome?
Yeah, first thanks for that lead-in. That was very generous. Municipalities have been, they've been on the front line, as we know, on most things that happen in this country. But when COVID hit, as Shauna said, you go back to March 16th, when COVID hit and everybody was shutting down, municipalities were still delivering their services, right? You still looked out the window and saw the garbage man come down the street and pick up your garbage. You were still getting clean water. The buses were running, the trains were running. So municipal services were still operating. In fact, you could argue quite clearly that a lot of municipal services were part of the frontline defense against the COVID, was just a continuing delivery of quality of service to the citizens. But none of that was being offset by revenues. Municipalities were deferring property taxes. There was no one riding the buses. So there was this enormous gap in between the expenses required to keep society going, people keep quality of life going for people, and the revenues to offset those costs. And so, just in the early days, Toronto was losing $60 million a week.
Wow.
And 20 million of that was just the alone running the TTC. And you could quote those numbers from all across the country. So there was a huge revenue shortfall, and therefore creating a huge fiscal gap. And so when you think of the Build Back Better and what comes after COVID, one of the great challenges municipalities are going to face is just the lack of financial resources to do what they need to do. The second thing that was really obvious and a real priority for particularly the mayors of the big cities during the March, April, May period, and still today, is the strains in the social fabric. Like what's going on? Because pandemics, as historians will say, have this habit of finding the weaknesses in society and attacking those weaknesses. And that's exactly what we were seeing here in this case, whether it was the inequities of the homeless people and the challenges of protecting the homeless, or the old folks in the retirement homes and their vulnerabilities. The mayors were desperately trying to figure out how to understand the challenges and how to respond to those at the level of the social fabric of their communities, and the inequities, the racial inequities, the gender inequities, all those things were becoming more prominent than ever before. Even though they were always there, they were just more evident because of the stresses of the pandemic. So this is a second feature of the coming out of the pandemic, is how do you respond to the spotlight that has been shone on all these challenges that is social in the social fabric of the community. And the third is governance. You can't run a council meeting in the normal way. A councillor can't do the normal business of working in the ward. So how does all of that, how do you respond in that way so you can maintain an effective governance framework in a city as you're trying to manage all these other challenges? So these are the kinds of things that cities have been facing all along, and like a lot of people, the cities were looking to the federal government to help them shore up their resources so that they could not be so in debt that they couldn't respond to the challenges that the communities were calling on them to respond to.
It's fascinating, Brock, because the financial challenges are quite obvious, right? They're running this municipality without having revenue sources. But this idea of governance, it's like on the one level, it's the formal governance. How do you run a city council? How do you run a staff? How do you run all of that? But municipal government is also the place where citizens' voice is most often the nearest to the politician, right? It's where they're heard. Right. So then if you shut down all of that, you keep everyone at home, how then do you hear from people?
Yeah,
right?
Okay.
And how do you reach out so that you can hear from people?
I have to say, I was in sitting around the big city mayor's table in April and May in particular. I was really proud of the genuine concern that the mayors were expressing for the social side of this challenge. They were, yes, the fiscal constraints were a problem, and the deliveries of services with no revenues was a problem, but they were really seized by the questions of social fabric and how they look after and how they provide the mechanism of support for the disadvantaged in their communities. And as you say, how do you then engage the community in the dialogue that is so natural in the ebb and flow of good governance in a city?
Fabulous. Thanks, Brock. Bill, your work at Social Capital, your whole life really has been about innovation. You're not only at Social Capital Partners, which is amazing in its own right, but you also manage a number of foundations. You built a successful business and sold it. You have an MBA from Harvard. All of this combined, you're focusing all of this energy on essential social innovation, social entrepreneurship. And yet here we are, right? I know during COVID that there's a lot of what I would call micro innovation. Maybe you can challenge me, right? But it's very hard. And I know we as a board have been spending a lot of time thinking about the next 10 years. And we started that by doing all this scenario planning, right? About the future. One of them was that we're going to be in a constant pandemic. It doesn't go away for years. How do we innovate in that culture, right? Another one is that, we are so desperate for security that we start to give up all kinds of rights. Right? I mean, I can't fathom that we would elect Donald Trump again. And he's not yet elected. I get that there's still a faint hope. But the reality is that there are, probably close to 100 million Americans that voted for him because he gave them some sense of security for the future, right? So what are we willing to give up to get that? Right? And then there's this third one, which is kind of the one that we kind of hoped for, is that there might be a sense of enlightenment, right? That we would look, this is kind of the Shauna Sylvester understanding of the future, right? That a new enlightenment comes out of COVID, that we have a new understanding, that we have a new sense of commitment to the future and a willingness to work together and give things up to make a better world, right? So talk to me about this and sort of this environment that we're in, and like, how do you even dare want to innovate in this time? Like, don't you just want to hunker down by the fire and wait for this to go away?
Nice, easy question. That's what I like.
I'm going to open it up to everyone.
This should take about a sentence, and then, a crystal clear answer will emerge, and then we can move on. Yeah, I mean, I think, Shauna's opening words about hope and your question about that were so instructive, because I think the key for all of us in this community is we have to put gas in each other's tank. We have to figure out how to give each other hope. I think that's one of the things that drives us forward. And I know all of us, I am sure, in the last 6 months, and perhaps more so waking up this morning, you sometimes reach the point where you just say, either I'm tired, or, is there any point, given what you were talking about in terms of election results and things like that. But I think what we all see, and all of us have experienced in our collective careers, there's a long tail to all these things. And there are things you can put in place today that will have, real seeds for change in the future. And we never know when the stars will align, but they will align sometimes. And you want to be in the right place at the right time when they align. And I think there are a whole bunch of potential stars aligning now. And again, that's, I think, the nature of the people on this call is we are hopeful. We do what we're doing because we believe, there is change to be had, and we can make this world a better place. And I do think COVID has opened up the opportunity. We've seen so dramatically how the world treats people very differently in COVID. There are people like me who have assets who are actually better off financially than we were a year ago, and people who don't have assets, who had the rug pulled out from under them in a completely inequitable way. And I think it's those openings of realization where you have to strike, and you have to strike in the right place, and you got to do it. And just what we're working on now, I think, is one of those examples. And who knows whether the strike will work or not, but it's open in a way that it wasn't before. And our eureka moment was a couple of years ago. We realized almost all of us who are working on solutions to inequality, have been working on the income side. Like ours was primarily meaningful employment. In many ways, yours are about, we got to eradicate poverty. Although you think about asset building from a community standpoint, and you have assets in that, which I think that's important. And those assets aren't just financial, that's sort of community and collective ones. But even the other solutions are income ones that you see on how we should build back better. They're fix minimum wage laws and have livable wages, or let's have universal basic income so everybody knows they're going to be taken care of, or let's have a more progressive tax system and tax the rich more and redistribute, all of which are great solutions and things that we need to do. Trouble is, though, the trouble with income solutions is, which are important, I don't mean to minimize them, is that the first time an unexpected event comes into the lives of someone who's the beneficiary of an income solution, kind of like a global pandemic, for instance, the rug's pulled out from under them. And we said, we got to solve the wealth side of this. And without going into all the details, that flipped a switch on us. We think the solution to this is around employee ownership. We've done some studies in the US where they have 40 years worth of legislation and incentives around creating 100% employee-owned businesses. There's 6,500 of those in the US, which nobody knows about, that have 14 million Americans enrolled in them, that have created $1.4 trillion worth of wealth. That's 100K per person. Canada is one of the few countries in the world, developed countries, that has no enabling legislation or incentives around employee ownership. So we're trying to strike on that opening right now, when it's become very clear that there are, the world has treated people very, very differently. And if you don't have assets, you're nailed in this world. And we think we can find a receptive audience. And you just have to believe you can do that. I'd say maybe 2 out of 10 of things that we, are looking to strike at, we succeed at. And so it's not like, we have 100% batting average. But if you go up to the plate enough, you're gonna get some hits. And so we just got to keep going up to the plate, and we got to keep looking for those opportunities. We got to keep looking where the leverage is and strike. That's sort of the way I feel about it.
Marvelous. I think at the end, I've noticed that from Social Capital Partners during this time, is that you've had so many different, and you've been also advocating so strongly for Main Street and supporting of small businesses during this time. And I just really I'm just moved by the energy that you have, and a sense that there's an optimism, and I think that's maybe what it takes. To move an agenda forward and to understand that in times of disruption, bold changes can occur.
Yeah, and you've just got to be comfortable with failure. I joke that we talk about, one of the things we're going to do is fail. And then, when I'm joking, I say, and we're really good at it. And then people think we're really confident at what we do. They say, you're really good at failure. Yep. And then you can be incompetent and people celebrate you, so it's brilliant strategy. But kidding aside, I think that's, we can't be satisfied with incremental change, or put another way, I'll put that another way, in the sense that Social Capital Partners is lucky, which a lot of organizations aren't. We have independent funding that doesn't care about failure. So it means we, as an organization, we should be held accountable to taking big risks. And there's no point for an organization that has that ability. So many people have so many strings attached to their funding, or, and can't take, huge risks. We're an organization that has the ability to take huge risks, and we wouldn't be doing our job unless we were doing that. And so for us, we don't care about failing, because it makes us think that we're doing the kinds of things we should be doing, taking on projects that nobody else can take on, because they don't have that ability because of either their funding, infrastructure, or their mandate.
Very, very important. We've got a number of questions coming in from Deborah, Tamer, David, Angela, and others. Before we do that, I want to ask you a question that is maybe deeply personal. And it's not just personal for me, but it's for many of the people who are living in these times. And I guess I'm trying to understand from your own perspective, where does your resilience come from? let's recognize these are dark times. And, I'm like a cup overflowing kind of person, right? And my wife sometimes introduces me. There's people who see the cup half empty and some see them half full. Here's Paul, my husband. He sees the cup as overflowing, and most days it just really pisses me off, right? So that said, I'm not feeling all that optimistic these days every day. I mean, I still rise to it most of the day, but it's hard. It's hard living through COVID. It's hard rising to the challenges in front of us. Any tips for our learners? Because I know all of you go through your dark moments as well as they do. How do we find our way in these times? Any of you, just your thoughts. How do we find our way in these times?
I take great solace from the energy that comes from people. Some of the things that Shauna was talking about is huge. It just is invigorating. And I still talk to some of the mayors, and like Barry Verbanovic from your neck of the woods.
Yeah.
He talks about the energy in the community to deal with the social issues in a Build Back Better context, and that gives me lots of hope and lots of energy. Where I share your hesitation, your concern is because we talk about Build Back Better, but there is going to be an enormous corporate push to build back the same. All the corporate infrastructure, all the economic infrastructure that's based on people buying things and doing things in certain ways is all going to be strong energy to come back the same way. I was really struck this morning by Matt Galloway on CBC was talking to a black woman activist in the U.S. and he was making the point that most white males and white females in the U.S. are turning to Donald Trump. And he asked her, what happened to the Black Lives Matter movement? What happened to all that energy and all the white energy that was attributed to that? And she said, it's disappeared. The system has overcome that energy that existed a few weeks ago. So I'm just concerned about the overwhelming systemic nature of the challenge in building back better. But I do draw my energy from what others are doing and talking about, and the genuine concern that people have for the social fabric in their communities.
Well, I want to come in on this question because what Brock is talking about is so important. And I want to talk to Tamarack learners and say, at no point should anyone feel like they have to be that person that's always stepping in. We have to be real about what's going on here and acknowledge that there are times that we are ebbing and there's times that we're flowing. And we need to figure that out as individuals, as teams, as institutions, as communities, because this is the long emergency. This is a long period of time. So knowing and understanding, Paul, this, my father died through, I'm teaching full-time 8 hours a day in the classroom as people, the day after George Floyd has died, and I'm teaching with Black students and others, and they're going through, as we all were, a huge crisis. In the middle of that, my father dies. I got to a stage where I could take it to the end of that class, and then I had to say to the rest of my community, I need to step back. I need to step back, because for me to step in again, I need to know that I can go through a period of self-care. Every one of us need to do that. We cannot continue to look to people who have been stepping up for that leadership all the time. That's not healthy. That's not resilience. So I'm putting a lot of time into thinking about what is resilience intelligence. What does that mean? We talk about emotional intelligence. We talk about cultural intelligence. What does that mean? And that means that we don't see ourselves as atomized little individuals in this experience, that I always have to have that cup half full. No, I am part of a broader community. And the way we get through this is together and recognize we have different energies and different skills and different capacities at different times, that we talk openly about mental health, that we talk openly about what are the systemic issues that we're up against. So we're not naive about that we don't look at power monolithically. Power is constantly changing. It's constantly mediating. So where are those entry points? Where are those inflection points? Where can we push? Where do we need to take some time? And that brings to a very different place. There's been a question about how do you work in this space of ambiguity? You ask questions, you open yourselves, you decenter the power so that you're allowing people to step in and bring what they have to bring into that. One of the biggest experiences I've been going through in these last 6 months is the humbling experience of realizing how people at different levels of our organization have things to contribute that I couldn't possibly understand. And I need to create the space in leadership for them to take leadership. And that's what dealing with all of this is for me, is that ebb and that flow and figuring out the resilience intelligence.
Nice. Two great answers. Bill, you jump in here.
Well, I know I should have gone first, given the quality of those answers, and then I would have. But I mean, I think those were great. If I put it personally, and I think this has been a helpful construct for me, I ask myself frequently, how much gas have I got in my tank, and is it full, 3/4, half, a quarter empty? And if it's on empty, what are the things that help me get it to full? And to Shauna's point, you take time. Often one of those things is just time, checking out and doing things that help you, whether it's getting into the outdoors or whether it's but sometimes you just have to take time. But I consciously ask myself, how much gas is in my tank now? And when it's hovering towards empty, and to Shauna's point, there's no judgment in this. It's fine if it's on empty. That's I know I have some things that speak to me that get it to full, or at least to a half, and that's about getting in the outdoors. It's surrounding myself with people I love, and doing something very different, and it's about taking some time, and then but I'm always on the lookout when my gas tank's full to see whose gas tank is on empty.
Nice.
Just as when mine's on empty, I try and think of who's on full and how do I get some of the gas from them? And I think those are just helpful constructs for me.
Beautiful. Great answers. I mean, I really feel that it's important in these times for us to create that space, to understand the ebb and flow, to find inspiration, which is why a lot of people are on this call today, to find inspiration from the three of you. It's why Tamarack has been offering weekly webinars and always inspirational ones in order for people to be able to get some of that recharge, but also to just, as you say, Bill, take the time to recharge and to understand. And I love the idea of, resilience intelligence. And I think, Shauna, that would make a great book. And it really kind of helps us to understand what it's going to take, not just now, but for years to come, and not only for individuals, but also for organizations. We're getting a lot of questions coming in here, and please keep sending them to us. I'm gonna take one here from Miranda Mackey. As a leader, how can we balance our own well-being while supporting our team's well-being? For nonprofit social service organizations, how can we leverage opportunities with the instability of government funding? And your top tip for each, re-engaging staff in finding their why during this time. I know, Miranda, that's a lot of questions, and they're all big ones. We could do a webinar on each one of them. Just some thoughts here about how do we manage in times like this? How do we help staff to find their why? How do we stay true to our purpose? How do we support our teams?
when I was we were going through this and I was still CEO at FCM, and I asked myself two questions. What do I need? Just as Bill and Shauna were just talking about, and so what do I need and how do I look after myself? Because what the organization needs from me is a certain kind of leadership. You know, everyone's scattered all over the region. They're in their homes, in their attics, in their basements, wherever. And so as long as I was looking after my needs, going for a ski, going for a bike ride in the Gatineau Park or something, then I was able to be the leader they needed. And part of that leadership was, well, in very practical terms, I used to do full staff videos once or twice a week. And sometimes it was just assuring people that their stresses were okay. We weren't expecting them to be on the ball 100% of the time, because we knew they were employees, they were parents, they were caregivers, and that's okay. The second was to make sure they understood that there was still an entity called FCM, and they still had a place to belong. So whether it's Tamarack doing webinars or whoever it is, it's giving people that sense of belonging to something that's cohesive, that's got a purpose. You know, it goes to it's how do you assure the why? And so we used to talk about successes. We used to talk about the culture that we had built and we still maintain, though even over a distance. And then we also would talk about the future. So it's really about understanding your own needs and looking after them, and understanding the needs of your organization from you as a leader, and helping people feel like they're still part of something that's united and whole and doing important things that are socially relevant and progressive. And that's what I was doing at FCM at that time.
Fabulous. We have a number of comments here. David, I think we know, is it David Floof? Somehow I think I know you, David. He said, well said, Brock. And as Tim Broadhead said in the spring, the pandemic has reminded us of why we need government, why expertise matters. You know, I have one from Deborah Abbott who says, the greatest danger, sort of her favorite quotes by Peter Drucker, the greatest danger in times of turbulence is not the turbulence, it is to act with yesterday's logic. Really interesting. Tamer Solomon, he's a marvelous director and foodie, blogger, and he asks this question from Ottawa. My question is for all the panelists. When talking about different and innovative ways people are organizing, what is meant by that? And can you provide examples? It's kind of an interesting time. It's maybe kind of looking at communal innovation. But how are people organizing differently? And are you seeing something emerging that is particularly hopeful? Shauna, Bill, you guys want to, one of you? We've got lots of other questions here. So
yeah, we've got lots of questions and fantastic questions too. And I want to just, before I go to that, I want to just tag on to what Brock was saying around how do you care for your staff right now? And I think the arts and creativity can bring joy in ways we don't usually see. So getting out of our heads a little bit, focusing in on relationship building right now, team building, looking at what brings joy, what brings energy to a team is really important. So we're putting a lot of time. The staff all said to me, no, we are not doing a strategic visioning, strategic planning process at our next staff retreat. No, too many people are new here. We're not going to a cerebral place. We're going to a place of heart, of caring, of team building. And they were categorical. And I went, oh, okay. Doesn't matter that I need a strategic vision. That's fine. That's what we need to do. So how are people organizing differently? Some of the things that I found are really innovative are the ways in which new partnerships are emerging. So distance, not disengaged is something where a group, this was an innovation that a group of staff came up and said, you know, we do dialogue. And yes, that's people to people, but we're going to go completely online here. And we're going to create this process called distance, not disengaged. And we're not going to do it alone. We're working with this awesome youth organization called City Hive. And we're going to work with another part of SFU that's really good on engagement, SFU Public Square. And we're going to get as strong as we can and learn as we're going along how to teach others how to facilitate online, how to do all of this Zoom tech stuff. So we're going to be really explicit in how we're doing this. So we're teaching people as we're going along. And every month there's a different we take the leadership every month on a different initiative, and so does City Hive, and so does SFU Public Square. So we've done this series of fantastic engagements on Distant Not Disengaged. I'm looking at the Canadian Urban Institute, which was not a very visible institute prior to COVID, I have to say. And now they're everywhere because they took this opportunity to really build out a sharing culture. So they talk about Canada Watch, what's going on in parts of Canada. They've got this incredible sharing network going on in Canada around different tools, and they've got exceptional webinars in the same way Tamarack does on a whole range of issues, Canadian Urban Institute. I'm talking to mayors around our region, and they don't miss what CUI is doing. So it's really fascinating to see new forms of organizing, and young people, wow. Together Tomorrow was a group of students I taught. They've now created this online Instagram-centered peer-to-peer support network for kids that are going through a hard time through COVID. It's kind of a mental health well-being initiative. That's one that's just emerged out of nothing. Like, these kids have had nothing, and they've just stepped into this space and said, no, we're going to create this. And we're seeing all of these new forms. The one that's the most exciting I've seen is the Buy Nothing networks that's emerged on Facebook. And they've now, I watched my own Buy Nothing network, which is in West End of Vancouver. There was a young single mother, immigrant, did not have any support networks, nothing. That Buy Nothing network provided food for her for 3 weeks with for her brand new child, created a whole community of support around furniture, everything she needed. That Buy Nothing network just came together like that. 3 weeks of solid, everybody stepped in to provide support. That is amazing in my mind. That is the real resilience.
Great example.
And I was just going to say, I mean, I think that's, back to the discussion on what does this open up in the way of opportunity. And I think of, my partner, John, on starting up with a couple of others, savesmallbusiness.ca, and went from having, this organization didn't exist until the pandemic hit, and John and several others realized nobody's got the right issue for small business, which is rents. And the government is actually putting in place the wrong solution for the biggest need. And they actually would survey within 10 days, they had more than 30,000 small businesses signed up for this, and ended up being the place that the government could go to get information on what small business really needed, because savesmallbusiness.ca could instantly survey the more than 30,000 small businesses that signed up. And actually, then they became, a conduit right to the Minister of Small Business, in terms of that. And they've disbanded now, which is interesting. So it's interesting how these forms of organization come up to address a need that is particular to a time where you actually say, who are like-minded partners? What are we trying to solve? How do we get sort of a kind of a community of interest that will coalesce around this to be able to drive big change? And Shauna and my partner John were very instrumental in, for instance, when Mountain Equipment Co-op, was being sold, and instantly getting all the members together. And so I think there are those opportunities that you see. Yes, we have to be worried about the macro. To Brock's point, there are a whole bunch of vested interests that will want to see things return the way they were, but there are a whole bunch of opportunities to build partnerships in a very fast way that can have significant influence and give you real hope on some critical issues. And I think those are the new forms of organization that it's been great to see, and to see kind of the impact they've been able to have.
Fabulous. Okay, let's go one more here. Lots of thank yous. Miranda, Tamer, others throwing thank yous out for your answers. Now from AJ, oh man, it's such a wonderful name, and I'm going to get it wrong. Puri. Thank you, Shauna, Brock, Bill, for your insights, and Paul for moderating this topic. Question: as we talk about innovation and leadership and the future, I would be curious to hear your thoughts on how do we, as Shauna mentioned, center power differently, and who holds power. Specifically, when we look at our cities, academic institutions, nonprofits, and boards of power organizations across Canada, Turtle Island, how do we shift the power and be allies to support shifting the boards, staffing to represent the diversity we have? For instance, in Toronto, Vancouver, the racialized populations and urban Indigenous are, 50 to 60% of the population. However, when we look at the decision-making and leadership and who's selected and nominated to be on the boards, this is not reflected, particularly through an intersectional lens, women of color, queer folks, folks with different abilities and faith. It's 2020, and it still feels like we're in the phase tokenism. How do we go beyond this? How do we support organizations and our individuals who truly believe in diversity in all forms and help them shift their leadership and decision making? And I'm not sure what this means, but he signs off or she signs off as thank you, Shukriya, Shukriya. I think that means thank you in another language, but it's beautiful. Okay. Huge question, but very much the question of our times. And some people said that the election in the United States was mostly about this issue. David Frum said that. The conservative commentary from Canada. Thoughts? Where do we go here? How do we shift this? And it's not just a question for COVID, but it's certainly a question for COVID as well.
Paul, I think you begin by asking someone like an Ajay to be on a panel like this. Ajay is, and thank you, he's from Coast Salish territory, so based in Vancouver, and is a leader in this space. And so that's why I was saying I want to hear from Ajay on these ideas. This is, I think, the most important issue that we as institutions have to grapple with. I reflect a medieval institution. I do. I work within Simon Fraser University. It is a medieval institution. And maybe some don't like the term white supremacist. It is a white supremacist organization. It is by its very structure, its very incentives. And it's trying really hard to face the structural racism that's embedded within that institution. And it is going through a process of really exploring that. At the center, we've embarked on a 2 to 3 year process to really look at what does it mean to address racial equity and justice at a profound structural level. And we're going through that every day, looking at all of our processes, policies, practices, changing them. Everything gets changed when you do that. It will mean we do not look the same. It is going to be a much more reflective, decolonized place to be and work. And we believe that dialogue is a decolonizing practice. We believe that whole conversation of engaging in these conversations is a decolonizing practice. And we need to really look at how do we create and shape conversations that enable voices that have not had neither access or control or support within those conversations to have that space. And some of it means I don't facilitate certain conversations. I do not have the cultural competency to do that. It's stepping back, letting different kinds of leadership step in. And that, I think, really requires both a personal reflection on the roles that we're playing, but it also demands an institutional reflection. And that's not an easy reflection, but it's essential.
Beautiful. It's why, Shauna, very well at Tamarack, when everyone was making these statements, and maybe we should have made one earlier, we said, we're not making a statement until we can tell you what we're going to do differently, And so we, as a team, reflected And we've been reflecting ever since. We made a statement. I get that, but now we have a 5-point plan, and it's only like a first step, but we've made 5 bold steps to trying to be better and to think differently in these contexts. So it's a start, and I know that we need to not only think differently, but we need to act differently. And I think that's what you're saying in this context. And again, a marvelous comment here by AJ. I do need to bring this webinar to an end. I do need to let Rute make a few announcements. Do read some of the comments here to end. Marina has a beautiful one. David has a beautiful one, and also a webinar that he's going to be putting on. Shauna has a wonderful response here that she wrote off to AJ. So do follow what's in this Q&A and chat box. Thank you, Shauna, Brock, and Bill. Thank you for all that you do for your communities. Thank you for what you do for Tamarack. And thank you for being with us here today. You're so busy. You have so many things that you could be doing. Thanks for sharing your wisdom. All the best to everyone. Thanks for coming. And